with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We've got Jess Zdeb on the left side of your screen. Jess is a principal regional planner with Metro. She's been focused on relationship building in her role. She prizes being part of the agency's role as a cross-sector convener to move big regional ideas forward, which is why she was tasked with leading the future vision process. And I'm also going to introduce Ted Reid, who's sitting on her right. Ted is also a Metro employee, a principal regional planner, and he has been specializing in regional land use policy. Ted has been the project manager for several of Metro's urban growth management decisions and has worked to adapt these processes to be responsive to the region's changing needs. So we welcome Jess, we welcome Ted. Thank you so much for bringing the future vision process here. This is for anyone that's not following along already, we really wanted to bring this here because it does touch all three fields of architecture, planning, urban design, and is a really important regional tool that we have. So maybe Jess, I will let you take it away. I'm excited to hear what you've been working on.
Great, thanks Fiona. Thanks for having us today. I listen into these urban design panels on a somewhat regular basis when they work for my schedule, so it's nice to be able to get to present to the group. Ted and I are kind of tag teaming and smushing together two things that we've both been presenting quite a bit. One is a overview of future vision / where are we at right now in the process, and then Ted is going to reprise the presentation that he literally just did for a council work session about an hour and a half ago. So you all will hopefully interrupt him less than our esteemed counselors did, and we can actually time his presentation. They were productive. No shade to the counselors. They were all really thoughtful and interesting questions. Just a statement of fact. All right, so I got going. All right. So today I am going to provide a bit of an overview of the project, talk about the Future Vision Commission, which is the body overseeing this work, get into the engagement approach and schedule, and then lastly, our current round of engagement that's open right now. So why are we doing this update right now? Metro Council and the project team really think that this is an opportunity to work on recreating a shared vision of the region's future, but more importantly, that vision that can inspire action. I have been at Metro for about 3.5 years, and I feel like I hear tell from some of my colleagues in this agency who've been here for a long time, or just talking with planners around the region who have been here longer than I, that they feel like there was a time when there was more of a shared vision across government agencies, non-government partners than we have today. And so we're really viewing this as an opportunity to kind of recreate that in a time that feels very challenging. We often are in spaces and start this conversation by saying it's a hard time out there for a lot of folks. It feels like something unimaginable happens every other week or every day, and we are asking you to think on a 50-year time horizon, which is really hard, but we're trying to really frame that as an opportunity rather than a challenge. This is also a space, because we're Metro, where we're talking about things at a regional scale, and we're also updating the vision because even though the 1995 one has some underlying values that remain pretty similar, there are languages and strategies in there that are out of step with current priorities. Notably, the way that equity is defined in the 1995 vision is very different from our 21st century concept of what that means for our region. Also, there is next to no mention of climate change, which is obviously a really important topic for us as we look ahead. So the future vision has only been done once before in 1995. It's required in Metro's charter, but is a document that's really kind of flown under the radar for the last 30 years. When people think of a vision for the region, they usually think of the 2040 growth concept, the map, which is the land use and transportation policy for the region that defines how and where we grow and don't grow. So future vision does exist. It happened around the same time as the development of the growth concept in the early 90s. The charter says that the future vision is a guiding document. It's not itself policy, but it does also state that the framework plan where the growth concept lives should describe its relationship to the future vision. The like very first version of the framework plan did do that, actually had language in there. Over time, that's dropped out of the plan. The future vision has not really been referenced in quite a while as a guiding document, but this effort is hoping to turn that around. Big picture, this is what we're doing, updating the future vision. The commission, which I'll talk about, their role is bounded by the process to update the future vision. Subsequent to that, and somewhat at the same time, we'll be developing an implementation plan for Metro actions that will get us to sort of shorter term actions that will move toward that 50-year future. One thing, for instance, that we know we're going to be doing is updating the framework plan. As I mentioned, it does need to describe its relationship to the future vision, so we'll be doing that again. That does include updating the 2040 growth concept, the outcomes of which Ted is going to talk about today. There will definitely be other Metro-led actions that we'll identify within that implementation plan, but also the hope is that this is a vision that is co-created with partners around the region and spurs others to act or identify those things that a jurisdiction or an organization is already doing that kind of fit within the steps toward this 50-year future. We did a scoping process last year with Metro Council where they define what they want to see out of this project. And not only do we want at the end of this a 50-year vision, but we also really want to see galvanized partners who are excited to work toward the region's potential together. And those are our 24 cities and 3 counties, special districts, other agencies that are public, but also the business community, philanthropic community, education sector, community-based organizations, all of those entities that make up who we are as an ecosystem of the region. And so to do that, we need a vision that is resonant with and relevant to folks in this region. And then you can see the other characteristics that Metro Council really directed us to have in mind as we are developing this vision. So I mentioned the commission. This is a body that is required in Metro's charter to develop and recommend the vision to council. Usually you might think that this is something that would be done by MPAC, our standing committee that kind of oversees Metro policy a little bit more generally, but the charter calls for this special body. And we took applications last year. It consists of 23 members from across the region. Just last week, 2 weeks ago, we had 2 new members appointed by council as replacements for a couple of folks who had to step off. They're meeting monthly. They are open to the public. They are the second Thursday of the month from 4 to 6 p.m. All the information about the meetings is available on Metro's website. These folks are expected to be ambassadors to their communities, to bring in their expertise, both lived and professional. But also they can't represent every last identity or interest in the region. So really their job is to listen to what we hear through public engagement and use that to create the vision. One thing probably of interest to the urban designers and planners in particular is that we are moving these meetings around the region so that folks are just exposed to what it's like to be in different parts of the region. For people who live in Portland, we want to get them out of the central city. For folks who live in Forest Grove, we want to get them to Oregon City. So we're moving these meetings around, both just to get folks exposed to what it's like to be in other parts of the region and to highlight particular themes or places of interest that really represent aspects of who we are. So we met Center Court at the Moda Center in March. We are going to be meeting in the brand new East County Library in July. Last meeting was held at the Hidden Creek Community Center out in Hillsboro, which if you haven't been there, I still think has the coolest playground in the region. And so we're really highlighting those different aspects of who we are. At a very high level, this is what the commission is doing to put the vision together. They have just started talking about a full draft of a call to action, which is their language, their kind of letter to the community to say, hey, we are creating this thing. Eventually it'll be in a document saying, hey, we did create this thing. Here is why we think you should act to help us implement the vision. Right now, the engagement that we're doing is going to feed into and create those shared regional values, which will interpret into guiding principles or ways that we make decisions in the future. Those are kind of the community driven, like heart space of the process. The drivers of change box there is a research based process being run by part of our consultant team called Institute for the Future. And that consists both of just kind of desk research to create some memos and some other communications pieces that accompany those memos, but also a set of expert panels where we're diving into themes and topics that are about those large forces that are going to shape the next 50 years of the region. At the end of the day, the vision will really consist of a set of aspirations that kind of state that future case, that aspirational hope that we have for what this region is like in the uncertain future with drivers of change, given those guiding principles. What is it that we want to see here? And because a long list of aspirations doesn't make any sense and isn't digestible, we will break that down into several focus areas. Really focus areas that are more at a scale rather than your kind of traditional planning areas of like transportation, economy, land use, because thinking 50 years in the future, those silos really break down and you have to think in kind of more of a systems perspective. So briefly to just go through our engagement approach and schedule, because that's really what this project is all about. We're centered on 4 principles that are driving how we do the engagement. Relationship building and a community-driven approach are those principles that are going to get us to that end of having a vision that is relevant and resonant with folks in the region that people actually want to help us implement in the coming years. We are also rethinking how we communicate and engage in this project, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Thinking 50 years in the future is inherently an imaginative exercise that makes us have to have conversations in a different way. And lastly, we know we are not the first people to envision what this region wants itself to be, so we're building on past work. We did a lit review kind of scan of about 30 regional visions and long-range planning documents from different public agencies, but also nonprofit organizations, institutions, as we started this work, and that will feed into the development of those shared regional values alongside the engagement that we're doing right now. One of the ways that we're pushing ourselves in terms of how we're doing engagement in this project is through using arts and culture as a means, not only actually of doing engagement, but of how we think about the project. 50 years, as I said, is an imaginative time horizon, and artists are really good at imagining things. So that's why we're bringing this into the process. We have an arts and culture consultant on board, Suba Ganesan Forbes, who is helping guide our work in this. We had an artist residency at the Metro Regional Center several months ago in March. We are doing arts and culture experiences with the Future Vision Commission, and we're very hopeful that we will also have a future round of grants for artist works to reflect and interpret the vision. Another unique aspect to this project is a Future Vision Youth Committee. This is not the first time Metro has convened a group of young people to help inform a planning process here, but they are really being elevated in this work because they are the ones who are more likely to be around in 50 years than we are. This group kicked off in March with 21 young people from across the region, actually ages 15 to 24. And I will say the 15-year-old is particularly impressive. This is facilitated in partnership with 2 community-based organizations, Next Up and the Blueprint Foundation. They are from throughout the region, acting as ambassadors to their own communities, whether that is their actual neighborhood or groups they're involved with. They are going to guide our work to develop a youth summit that's going to happen this summer on August 15th, which will be a broad call to the region's young people to get engaged with this process. They are interacting with the Future Vision Commission and will be doing some workshops alongside them. You can see on the top of the screen here their first opportunity at our April meeting to come speak to the Future Vision Commission, which I think everyone in the room was really excited about. And we want to make sure that they feel and are engaged enough so that their values and priorities are reflected in the vision. Big picture, this is what we're doing in terms of engagement. As I mentioned, right now we're in the thick of this regional values, big community engagement window. We'll have another really big community engagement window at the end of this year, beginning of next, where we've got a draft vision to get out on the table and are looking for priorities as we head into implementation. This summer we'll be out in the community tabling just to make sure that people are aware of the fact we're doing this work, help with maybe some exciting and fun family-friendly activities at that tabling. And then in the fall is where information gleaned from the youth summit is going to feed into a vision summit of kind of cross-sector leaders from around the region who are starting to put pen to paper on what those aspirations are for the vision. And those will be further refined in vision tables, and the work from that will feed to the commission in their drafting. So lastly, just a little bit about what we're doing right now. I did not update this slide. The engagement window is still open through the end of the month. You can take the survey that is linked on this slide. We would really appreciate it if you, your friends, anyone you know in the region takes the survey, especially if you don't live in Portland, where we are currently overrepresented, unsurprisingly, in the survey data. But this is really where we're getting to that regional values to form the foundation of the entire vision itself. So encourage everyone to take the survey. And in this, we are doing a whole bunch of roadshows like we're doing right now. Just want to remind everyone, these are ways to get engaged with the project. I will put information in the chat once I'm not talking about the expert panels that we have coming up in June, and a later one TBD, exactly the date, in July. But really encourage everyone to stay engaged with the project over the coming year. So I'm going to hand it off to Ted. It's going to take a minute to get into his presentation. So if anyone has questions they want to drop in the chat while we're pausing and switching, feel free to do that.
Just while you're doing that, it looks like the engagement survey was open until May 15th.
That was what I'm saying. I neglected to update
okay,
on the slide.
Okay.
It's actually open through the 31st.
Neat. Okay, great.
Apologies on that. That always happens, right? You want to switch? Sure. Yeah. All right.
Okay, thank you all for having us. Again, I'm Ted Reid with Metro's Urban Policy and Development Group. As mentioned in the introductions, I work a lot in urban growth management, but more recently I've been working with Jess a bit on future vision and sort of the next step of implementation, what that might look like. As Jess mentioned, we wanted to look back a bit at the outcomes that our region has seen over the last 30 years since the growth concept was adopted, to reflect on what's working, what's not, what some of the causes may be. It's a complex story, so we'll get right into it. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on because I think Jess covered some of this well, what we're up to here. So getting right into what the growth concept is, it's helpful first to look at where development happened over the last century, so where housing development happened, because that's very much why this region decided to come up with a regional plan back in the mid-90s. And it's you know, a means of looking at whether we're succeeding in some of the goals of that planning. So this video is going to be on a loop, but it essentially starts in 1900 and shows you where housing development has happened in the region. And so many of you will be familiar with the patterns that you're going to see. I'll let it keep going while I talk. So starting in 1900, thereabouts, you see most growth happening in central Portland. And then when we get to the post-World War II era, you begin to see some of the development out on the edges a bit more. Those areas are what we now consider close-in suburbs. Development continued to happen going outwards into the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. And it began to get the concern of many folks that live in the region of what would happen if we didn't have an intentional way of managing this growth. And so beginning in the mid-90s, the region came up with a plan for how that was to happen. And I'll talk again a little bit about what that plan called for and the degree to which it's been successful in directing this growth where it was intended. So I'll pause if I can find where the pause button is again. Okay, there we go. So this is the 2040 growth concept map that some of you may be familiar with. It really was very much focused on where growth would happen. Again, in the lead up to the mid-90s, there was a lot of population growth happening. Our region had a boom in the tech manufacturing with Intel coming on the scene. So a lot of population growth happening on the west side in particular. So this growth concept was very much focused on where all these people are going to live, where are they going to work, what are the transportation facilities that we'll have to connect those areas, how are we going to make sure that people aren't stuck in traffic all the time, and how are we going to make sure that nature is interwoven with the urban environment so that it's not something that you go visit, but it's part of our daily lives. So the growth concept that was adopted in the mid-90s identified a number of urban centers around the region. This was not about all the growth happening in Portland. It was about having growth happen in central Portland, but also the Gresham Regional Center and out in Orinco and Hillsborough, having multiple regional centers that saw this growth. They were well connected with various transportation options that would mean that people wouldn't have to drive everywhere to get where they needed to get to on a day-to-day basis. And the growth concept also called for management of the region's urban growth boundary. It's the line around the urban portion of the region that creates a clear delineation between urban and rural uses. And the notion was that would be expanded over time as needed through a thoughtful, deliberate process. And so when we look at how this growth concept gets implemented, it's important to know that Metro is just one entity that implements this plan. Our Metro Council makes decisions on a cyclical basis about the regional transportation plan that gets updated every 5 years, as well as the urban growth management decisions that they make every 6 years. We also have a number of funding and partnership activities that the Metro has taken on in more recent years, acknowledging that regulatory approaches have some limits, and so you'll see more emphasis on funding and partnerships in recent years. For instance, our placemaking grants program that funds community groups work, as well as our 2040 planning development grants that recognize that a lot of the planning happens at the local jurisdiction level. And then likewise, our transit-oriented development program to try to spur transit-oriented development along high-capacity transit lines throughout the region. More recently, things like our affordable housing bond and supportive housing services levy to address some of the gaps in what the housing market will do on its own. And then I should also mention the parks and nature bonds that voters have approved several times now to fund the purchase and protection of natural areas around the region. But again, a lot of this gets implemented at the local level. Cities and counties adopt plans that implement regional policies. The private market plays a role here in actually building what the plans call for. And so as we think about the outcomes of the plan, it's important to consider all of the various actors that need to act in coordination to make this happen. So moving on to, I'm going to cover a number of different topics: growth management, housing, transportation, things like that. So moving on to the first one, growth management, this was a core focus of the growth concept. Again, where are all these people going to live and work? And it's a core function that Metro has had for some time now, since its foundation in 1979, managing the region's urban growth boundary. And again, the focus of the growth concept was that most growth would happen in urban locations that are well connected with a variety of transportation options. This map shows basically the intensity of residential development from 2009 to 2023. And you see the areas with the higher peaks that are sort of more bluish purple. Those are the spots where we've had more intense residential development over this time period. So you see places like central Portland, of course, showing up here where the bulk of growth has happened, but also around the region, much as the plan called for, seeing growth in places like Orinco Town Center and Amber Glen out in Hillsborough, as well as some expansion areas like out in Happy Valley, Villebois down in Wilsonville, and then North Bethany up in unincorporated Washington County. These areas have really kind of taken on the bulk of the work to produce housing for people over the years. The other thing that I'll point out about this is that most of our region's housing growth happens through redevelopment and infill, not through use of vacant land. So over the last decade, 60% of the new housing that's been built has been through redevelopment and infill. So this is, basically an indication that the plan is working, that we're using land efficiently. Before expanding the boundary, we're making good use of what we've got to protect farms and forests around the edge. The other thing that gets our attention in this look back is that our region has actually grown a bit less segregated over the last couple decades in terms of geographic segregation. And essentially, the story here is that our suburbs have become more diverse. And so the percent of the regional population that lives in a predominantly white community has gone down over time, again, primarily with diversification of suburbs around the region. I mentioned the urban growth boundary before, that of course is one of the main tools the Metro has for managing growth. And the growth concept went through a number of different scenarios in its development. Basically testing, well, what if we held the boundary tight and we grew up, or what if we let the boundary be loose and there was a lot of outward growth? What if most growth happened in neighboring cities like Canby and Sandy or Vancouver? So it tested a bunch of different options, and the preferred alternative that we ended up with was basically a blend of the best features of all those different alternatives. The growth concept that got adopted imagines that by the year 2040, there would be about 252,000 acres in the urban growth boundary. That, again, it would be expanded over time as there was need. What we have found in this look back is that already in year 2026, we've expanded the boundary more than expected would happen by the year 2040. So we're up at 262,000 acres in the boundary today, so about 10,000 more than we expected by the year 2040. And what we find when we look at those expansions is that simply adding the land to the boundary doesn't necessarily result in jobs and housing, that there are some more fundamental challenges around how you pay for the infrastructure to support development, the streets, the pipes, the parks that you need to support development. And so most of the expansions have happened in the 1998 onward timeframe. That's, again, the bulk of when most of the land was added to the boundary. And what we find when we look at those expansions from 1998 onward, only about 12% of the housing that was planned for those expansion areas has been built. The other 88% of planned housing just hasn't happened yet. We often get questions when we talk about this statistic about Damascus. Some of you may be familiar with that expansion. It was in 2002, several thousand acres added on the east side of the region in Clackamas County. The notion was that a new city would be created there, and that we would have a lot of our housing growth happen there. It proved to be much more challenging. The city struggled to agree on a plan for how growth would occur, struggled to identify funding for infrastructure. And so if we exclude Damascus, which is now disincorporated, only 17% of the planned housing in expansion areas has been built. So again, some more fundamental challenges beyond just providing land that I think have become really apparent to us in this work. Moving on to the topic of housing, when we think about growth management, one of the things that we try to keep our eye on is, out of the larger 7-county metropolitan statistical area, how much of that population growth is happening in our urban growth boundary. And the general notion is that we don't want a lot of spillover growth happening in places like Woodburn or Canby or Sandy, Newburgh, that we want to allow the possibility that people can choose to live in our urban growth boundary. And they won't be displaced because of high costs or lack of housing. So that's the notion. And when we look back at this history of what we call our capture rate, so it's the share of the 7-county population that growth that we capture in our urban growth boundary, it's been increasing over the years, up to 70.5% in the 2010-2022 timeframe. So I think this is a positive indication of our region's approach, that we've been successful in attracting people to live here and have managed to accommodate a lot of that growth here. I suspect that the stat has gone down a little bit in the last few years. Many of you probably have read the news stories about more growth happening in Clark County. So I think if we updated this, it might look a little bit different in the last couple of years. In order to have the kind of compact growth that the growth concept called for, we really needed to shift the kinds of housing that got built. Single family detached housing is the most land extensive type of housing that's built. It has a yard, so it's going to take up more room. So at the time of the growth concept adoption, there was an acknowledgement that there needed to be a shift more towards multi-unit housing, so apartments and condos, and then a sort of newer notion, middle housing, like townhouses, duplexes, triplexes. So this first pie chart shows you all the housing stock in the urban growth boundary today, or 2024, what that mix is. It's half single unit detached housing, followed up by about a little bit more than a third multi-unit housing, and then we have middle housing at 8%. Other housing is largely senior housing, but also a few other more niche housing types like houseboats, for instance. When we look at what has been built, so the new housing that's been built since 2040 growth concept, we can see that things have shifted. So we've seen that shift towards more multi-unit housing. Again, this is just the new housing that has been built 1996, 2024. Almost half of it was multi-unit housing, so apartments and condos, a decline in single unit detached housing. And then on the increase here, we see middle housing. So again, things like townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, really starting to pick up some speed in terms of providing more housing options for people in the region. It hasn't been enough, though. You all, no doubt, have seen the frequent stories about housing underproduction. It's a nationwide phenomenon. This is not an excuse for our region. We have a challenge here. We rank 19th in Up for Growth's 2024 report about housing underproduction. so we have this challenge, much like other areas around the country do, and they run the gamut from regions that have focused on compact growth to ones that have pursued more expansive growth plans. So you'll see on this list other regions like Atlanta, for instance, also have this challenge of underproduction. It's for a bunch of different reasons. The federal government for decades has gotten out of the business of paying for infrastructure to support housing development, so that's a big one. Lending costs are up, construction costs are up, there are shortages of skilled construction labor. We have restrictive zoning codes in some instances, though I think Oregon has been on the forefront in addressing that issue. But the fact is that we're just not building enough housing as a region or a nation to keep up with population growth. And the people that experience this most acutely are renters. So this, wave our hands to get the lights back on. This bar chart shows cost burden. So you'll see the sort of lighter green and the darker green. Light green is cost burden, dark green severely cost burden, according to different demographic groups. And these burdens really fall most heavily on younger households, older households, so people just beginning their careers, as well as people on fixed incomes, as well as households that have someone with a disability, and then BIPOC households as well. You'll see here that about 2/3 of Black households, renter households, are cost burdened or severely cost burdened. These are the groups that experience the housing shortage most acutely, that really struggle to compete in a free market where others are able to bid up the price of housing. Moving on to the next topic of transportation. So the growth concept was pretty unique at its time for thinking about both transportation and housing together, and how they interact, that the kind of housing you built was going to influence the kind of transportation system you need, and vice versa. And again, the focus of the growth concept was to provide people with more options, so that they wouldn't have to be driving everywhere to get where they need to go. The stats look good for our region in terms of that reduction of reliance on vehicles. So if you look at daily vehicle miles traveled for our region compared with Oregon and the U.S. more broadly, the average person in our region drives about 17 miles a day, and so you can see that how that compares with the rest of the country. Just for reference, a place like Austin, Texas, the average per capita daily vehicle miles traveled is about 33 miles per day. So we're driving significantly less than other regions in the U.S. Again, because we've had this focus on keeping our growth compact, keeping destinations close by. Most of our travel is for non-commute trips, so it's all of the other trips that really matter here. And what we find is that within our region, we see variation too. So you see all of the places that growth concept identified for growth: town centers, regional centers, central city, the corridors. Those areas are showing up here in the light blue. Areas that have travel significantly below the regional average. So people that are seeing the benefits of not having to drive quite as much. And then as you move outward, you see some of the patterns of people needing to drive a bit more to meet their daily needs. Moving on to some of the benefits of this focus on compact growth and reducing the amount that people have to travel. People save money on transportation expenses, but it's also saving lives. Our region has a Vision Zero goal of reducing traffic fatalities to zero. We're not there. We have work to do. But the result of us driving less and shorter and fewer motor vehicle trips is that we have fewer traffic fatalities per million residents than pretty much any other place in the US. So the larger circles on this map show more incidents of traffic fatalities per million residents. And so you see the Portland region is doing well by this measure. Again, we're not there in terms of achieving Vision Zero, however. Climate change was not something that the region was particularly focused on during the development of the growth concept, but it's actually, as many of you know, turned out that we know that compact growth is one of the best ways in terms of urban planning of reducing carbon emissions, both in terms of emissions from buildings. They tend to be lower for multi-unit housing, but also reducing reliance on cars to get there. Our state has a ambitious goal of reducing emissions to zero by the year 2050. You see that goal shown in the dashed black line headed down to zero. But you also see the gap between forecasted emissions and the dashed green line and getting to that zero by the year 2050. Local and regional actions, things like that compact growth and reducing reliance on cars are a big part of that. The state has a role to play as well in terms of pricing transportation facilities. Federal government has a role to play, and there's some new challenges there with removal of incentives for low emission vehicles. If all goes according to plan, we still have a gap. So we really need to double down across the board. We have some new challenges with reduced transit ridership that are going to need to be figured out to get to this goal of zero carbon emissions. Climate change is being felt today in our communities. It shows up as extreme weather events, either flooding or extreme heat. Metro did some work in the last couple of years on what we call our cooling corridors work that identified areas that are particularly vulnerable to urban heat that lack a means of keeping the urban area cool. So tree canopy, for instance. So this project mapped areas that are priorities for filling those gaps to provide people with some relief from the heat that we expect to be an ongoing theme in the future. Moving on to the economy, we see disparities in household income that break out by race and ethnicity. So you see the green line there is the area median income, 120,000 household income. You see that there are a number of different racial and ethnic groups that are falling well below that line. I'll point out in particular Black and Indigenous households. We see the biggest disparities in terms of incomes. The other thing that we want to pay attention to with the economy is this notion of every generation doing a little bit better than the previous generation. And we had Cascadia Partners do some work for us that looked at this question about adult workers born in 1992 versus adult workers born in 1978. As it turns out, in Portland and Austin, adult workers born in 1992 have higher incomes than those born in 1978. This is in comparison with a decline for the U.S. as a whole, as well as Minneapolis, Denver, and Salt Lake City. So some positive news there. When we look at the makeup of the jobs that we have by sector, looking back over the last 30 years, how each of these sectors have grown, you see the sectors that support the population growing the most, so things like education and healthcare. And we think that is going to be even more true in the future as the population ages, that healthcare is really going to be one of the bigger growth fields. But moving down the list, you see construction as well, again, a sector that supports the local population. Moving down further to where we've had some losses, manufacturing is one where we've seen job losses over the last 30 years. 20% fewer jobs in that sector than we did in 1995 in the region. This is a sector that gets a lot of attention because they traditionally have provided middle wage incomes that may not require a college education. They bring wealth to our region because these tend to be traded sectors in manufacturing. Nationwide, however, this is not really out of step. 27% decline in manufacturing jobs nationwide over the same time period. You all have probably heard some of the reasons why. Offshoring of manufacturing jobs to countries with lower labor costs or lower environmental standards, as well as automation. So essentially a job that required human labor before, much of it can be done through automation now. So that's part of what's happening here. One way that Metro tries to support the industrial sector is through additions to the urban growth boundary for industrial lands. Industrial uses tend to have fairly unique needs for large flat sites. And so over the years, the Metro Council has expanded the boundary to add a number of different industrial areas to address those unique site needs. So this shows relatively recent aerial photos from 2024 of a number of these expansion areas. And what you can see is that many of them are underdeveloped or vacant today, despite having been in the urban growth boundary for a number of years. What we take from this is that it's one thing to add the land, but there's another step that we keep coming back to, that we need to figure out how to fund site readiness. So how do we pay for the transportation facilities to support development of these areas? And then some other big questions about what the sort of changes to the economy may mean in the future for industrial development. How much of this might produce jobs versus producing economic activity like data centers, and what are the benefits that accrue to residents from those different kinds of development. Moving on to farmland, so this was a big focus of the growth concept, protecting farms and forests outside the boundary. Agriculture is big business, and if we look at the value of agricultural products sold in 2022 in the 3-county area, it was just under $1 billion worth of products sold. Metro engages in providing certainty to the sector by largely through our growth management policies. We have 269,000 acres of rural reserves designated as the light green areas around the map. Those areas are off limits for urbanization through at least the year 2065. So provide certainty to those agricultural operations going forward so they can invest in their operations. When we look at what has happened to agricultural land over the last several decades, I'll direct your attention to the bars on the right. It's the total acreage in agriculture for the 3-county area. The other ones just break it out by county. We've had a slight decrease in land in agriculture. So in many ways, our growth management practices have helped here, making sure that we're not paving over productive farmland around the region. Last topic. This is a whirlwind. So Parks and Nature, I mentioned that the notion with growth concept was to intersperse Parks and Nature throughout the urban area. Today, Metro cares for about 20,000 acres of parks and open spaces. That's the area of about 4 forest parks. And the way that those parks are distributed around the region is fairly uniform. So this map shows in hashed sort of mustardy brown color equity focus areas. So this is a geography that Metro developed for our regional transportation plan. It essentially identifies areas where we have populations with English as a second language, lower income households, BIPOC households. And when we look at that with where the parks and trails are, we see that parks are largely accessible to much of the population. We have a few discussion questions. Fiona, I realize we don't have a lot of time, but I'll let you take it from here. Reactions, surprises.
Wow, thank you, Ted. This, I think, just summarizes how many topics are folded into Metro's purview, and that Jess is going to be juggling in the months ahead, just as we define what the future vision looks like. David, I'm going to pass it to you. I think you're going to manage some of the
Yeah,
questions.
thank you, Ted and Jessica. It's really is pretty interesting, and that was a whirlwind, but we do appreciate it. We're all in the business more or less, so we kind of keep up. But there's, the factoids, sort of getting the important factoids locked in. We didn't get a lot of questions coming in. Reactions are great work and interesting information, for all of us. I'm out in Hillsboro, for example. And we're certainly not stopping growing things may go up and down. We're not stopping growing anytime soon within the metro boundary. I had put in some of these like sausage finger questions. I meant to type expert. So like, what are the expert panels that you mentioned, Jessica?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So coming up on June 2nd, we have a kind of complimentary look back at the impacts of the 2040 growth concept. And that panel is really a couple experts from the community focusing in on what have been those disparate impacts and benefits to communities through a racial equity lens over the last 30 years. And given that, what we know now, what are the lessons that we can take ahead into an update of the growth concept based on that looking back? As I said, June 2nd here at Metro Regional Center. You can also tune in on Zoom. That will include Marisa Zapata from PSU, Nolan Leinhart from ZGF, JT Flowers from Elvina Vision Trust, and then potentially a fourth speaker as well. It's going to be moderated by Marisa Madrigal, our COO. Second expert panel is June 17th, and that is going to be the first one that is moderated by Rachel Hatch from Institute for the Future, who's on our consultant team. And that one is really looking ahead to this question of what if human networks really are the underlying framework for resilience in the coming 50 years in this region. And it's a kind of heady question, but we're getting at it from a couple different, like very disparate perspectives. That panel will have an like emergency manager from City of Gresham, who has a long history in working in emergency management and public health. Tony DeFalco, who is the ED of Latino Network, is part of that panel. An artist, a like socially engaged artist named Vovo, is on that panel as well, and Adam Davis, the ED of Oregon Humanities. So kind of coming out from that perspective. So those are the two that are on the books. Everyone here obviously welcome to attend their public events. We're really trying to take these opportunities of learning together in public about important themes for the future vision. There'll be more announced later.
Great. That's really an interesting, diverse set of experts. I'm kind of excited to hear that. I'm sort of thinking, well, architects, planners, but there's a real culture or community-wide diversity that has to have some perspective, right? Because you're asking from like the 90s to now,
Yeah.
what went right and what went wrong. So those are big questions, but good ones. I wanted to mention that the AICP numbers for the presentation, it was posted by Kathy in the chat there. Fiona had a question, which is we're basically 1 minute out, so people are going to start dropping off. But I do want to get through these within the future vision. How are or aren't you compartmentalizing forces beyond our region versus those we have local control over? It's a good question. Like, what about what's out there versus what's in here? Is it something that how do you deal with that?
That's a great question for 1 minute or less. I mean, some of what Ted spoke to too in his presentation is that even the outcomes, right, that we've seen in the last 30 years, like some of that's attributable to the growth concept. A lot of that is attributable to history, policy, and global market forces. So there's no way that we can restrict people's conversations to just what we have control over in this region, or even we as one actor in this region as Metro. So at least within the region, part of what we're trying to do with the process and the eventual vision is like bring enough people into the conversation that someone in there is the actor that can actually pull a lever and make something happen. It's not always Metro, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's a business organization, sometimes it's a foundation. So part of what we're doing with the process is trying to pull in enough actors that it like someone in there, that's their bailiwick.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It is huge, and kind of even just the challenge of you all distilling it down into this fine hour of interesting information is a big deal, let alone trying to tackle the change. Like I kept thinking as you were presenting, like aspiration, implementation, there is a lot of working pieces in between that. And of course,
Yeah.
any of us sitting in the cities within the metro region doing our thing with our community development codes and sort of the new wave of industrial pressure now as data centers in Hillsborough, we're certainly feeling that incredibly strong. So yeah, always new things coming up, but implementation is something I'm curious and interested about. Looks like you're going to get kicked out of your room.
We are getting booted. Sorry.
Okay, well, we'll let you go because, as I said, people start disappearing quickly anyway. We thank you on behalf of the Urban Design panel and everybody today. Thank you so much. Fiona, I'll just toss it over to you for 1 second.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Ted. We do have a topic for next month. David, I'm blanking on, it's the city of Portland. Please tune in.
It's an update on the analysis by staff to the council on the design review and reformation or not thereupon. Okay, well, thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Ted. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
See you next month.